future. So whenever you're ready, Matt.
Great. We'll get started. So as you said, my name is Matt Kammerait. I'm VP of Product at DAQRI. And today specifically, I'm going to talk about kind of some dirty little secrets, some things that we really don't like to talk about in the industry, but that I think are really useful to spend more time thinking about, and rather than kind of thinking about an ideal future where some of these things go away or are kind of phased out, the more we pay attention and solve for them now, the less of a factor they'll be, and the quicker we'll get to those futures that we're all trying to get to. Just so I can contextualize well, though, before we get started, I want to take a quick poll on kind of everyone's background. So if you self-identify as a developer, raise your hand. Okay, self-identify as more of a designer or creative. Okay, more of a business type of some variety. Okay, and psychologists. Any psychologists? All right, good. So my background is in behavioral psychology and human factors. So I'm going to focus a lot on that side of what we do, both from a marketing standpoint, creating interesting campaigns and stories, and then a lot of the same things really translate to an industrial framework and a utility-based framework as well. And so I'll kind of unpack how we look at it from a user experience perspective, from a user behavior sort of perspective. And a lot of what we see here, as is probably the nature of science in general, I think will feel intuitive. It'll feel like stuff that, yeah, that makes sense. That's how we would design things. But then all of a sudden when we look at how we go to implement campaigns or how we go to create content, we tend to throw these principles out, back with the strategy presentation that came up front. So a lot of what we're going to talk about today is about friction. But the underlying kind of principle or the user dynamic that drives friction is really a trust-based economy. So whether you're looking at an industrial application, you're looking at a marketing campaign, anything where you're bringing AR into a new context, this trust is really, really crucial. And we've seen other technologies in the past kind of break this paradigm or have negative outcomes come from the breaking of this trust. A big one there is QR. It's an example that I always use where because it has this recognizable, consistent visual that people see all the time, once that trust is broken, people associate that with bad outcomes across the board. Even if maybe 80% of the time they were being delivered great outcomes or good results, because it's kind of unsteady or shaky, consumers lose confidence in that, and end users, any audience, loses confidence in that very quickly. And so I think we as an industry have a responsibility and an onus on us to maximize the user experience and to build that trust in a positive fashion. So that's true whether we're collaborators, whether you work for a competitor of DAQRI, anyone in the industry is really responsible for how people perceive augmented reality, how people perceive 4D. And so what I'm going to look at here is kind of this friction-based progression. So this is a perfect example of what we don't like to talk about. So trade shows are great where people can come to a booth. We've got everything pre-set up for them. All the content is cached. And they don't have to go through all of these steps that we know that people have to go through. So in today's current mobile paradigm, it's a 7-step process. We all have our creative version of it that's only 3 steps. But really, there are 7 steps that people have to go through to get to any experience and to get to that ultimate payload. And while we know how cool and amazing and awesome that payload is, or how useful it is in a utility-based application, they don't. And they have to get through all 6 steps not knowing that. So when you look at response rates, when you look at how far people make it through this funnel, it's no wonder that there's a big drop-off or a big bounce rate on a lot of these steps. And what we also see, because one of the common answers that I hear when we talk through this challenge is that, oh, in the next generation that'll be easier, or it's right around the corner that we're going to be in a much simpler framework for the deployment of this content or these applications. But you see that even when we move from a native app to say a browser-based, maybe WebGL framework for the delivery of AR, you still have 6 of the 7 steps to get through. So that friction is still there. For first-generation wearables, again, kind of heralded as the solution to this problem or the savior of the industry, 7 steps. Still, you've got an application, Android-based framework in most cases, where they're having to go through all of those steps to access content. Now, sure, in kind of a next-generation wearable sort of framework where you've got layered, adaptive, contextual applications, a lot of those steps are then removed. But I think there's a whole different set of challenges and potential friction there. So ultimately, what I think it's most useful to do is look at the progression we deal with today and break that down. And so at DAQRI, we work a ton in the industrial sector. And so one of the big kind of driving methodologies there is lean, or a Six Sigma methodology, where the reduction or elimination of waste and non-value added activities is the primary driving factor. So what I want to do is take a look at this breakdown, this actual path that we have to deal with, as compared to that ideal path, and then really kind of compare and contrast, or figure out what are the ways that we can move people along this progression prior to that final payoff of the 4D experience, or the augmented reality experience. And one really crucial thing to remember in this context is, no matter where you're working, these are your users. This is your audience. They are essentially 13 years old, even if they are not actually 13 years old, in their newness to the technology and the way that they're going to have to move through these steps. Because it's unfamiliar, they're essentially pubescent teenage girls. And let me tell you, they're not happy. They're not happy with the way that we're structuring this stuff today. They're not happy with the campaign construction. The vast majority of them are not making it to the payoff unless you're right next to them, kind of guiding them through that. And what I think the major breakdown is here is that it's an inefficient value exchange. We're not giving enough value along the way for people to justify that additional activity. And this is really what that looks like today. So on the discovery mechanism, when we're telling people about an augmented reality experience, we make really big promises. This is going to be amazing. You're going to love this. It's going to change your life. And then all of a sudden, what they get after that is just friction, 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 big friction in terms of wireless connectivity and difficulty in getting them content, and then a small payoff once they get that experience, if they've made it all the way through. And that really equates to this paradigm of broken trust, where they no longer can rely on these big promises that are being made. So even if they love augmented reality fundamentally, they may not head down this progression. I know I personally, even being within the industry, see AR ads all the time and don't pull out my phone, don't download the application, don't launch it, and don't experience what's on the other side. And some of that goes into content design, and I'll use a few examples from print, because as you mentioned, that's my background. Where I think the tendency, whether in a cutesy fashion or just unintentionally, the tendency is to jam these instructions down in the bottom left-hand corner, reduce them to as few steps and as little real estate as possible, or come up with clever little icons to shove up in the corner that represent this experience, which we in the industry all understand mean, hey, there's something here. And in a meeting, you can kind of get away with saying, oh, yeah, that's a good enough call out. But we all know that, when someone buys a magazine and is reading through this page, that, they're basically going to miss that. That's like a page number. They're not even going to see it. And if I'm going to pick on other people's content, I'll pick on a campaign of my own as well. So this was something that we did with Maxim magazine. Here you can see 95% of the page obviously devoted to something completely unrelated to the experience, especially when you consider that I added the censor bar only for this presentation. So in the actual piece of content, even more distracting. And then even if you figure it out and see the call out, you have to know what Maxim Motion is. You have to know what that means and how to get to it. And there is this temptation to think, no, my users are different. They're special. They really care, and they're maybe in an industrial framework where the utility of this or the training aspect is going to be enough to drive them across the barrier. And this is something that at DAQRI we're really familiar with. We work across a ton of different industries and with very specific and context-rich use cases there. But what we've found, and what I see especially coming from a psychology background, is that people are people no matter where you find them. So whether it's folks in oil and gas looking for a more efficient way to train the younger half of their workforce to be more effective more quickly, the novelty of the technology, the unfamiliarity, or even just the novelty of the content and the task is such that they're basically back to being kind of those teenage girls. So whether you're doing part identification, whether you're delivering big data through the context of a wearable framework, you still have that frustration, you still have that friction that's baked into these different types of experiences. We all know what that frustration feels like the minute you see this at 11 a.m. on your device. And ultimately, the end users, the folks who are receiving this, don't care. And it doesn't matter what social media taught us about how much they really want to engage with brands. They really don't. What people care about, whether they're at work or at play or at home or interacting with one another, is stuff they like, really cool stuff they're interested in. So what we have to do is flip this whole value exchange conversation. We have to make it build over time, so when they hit friction, they also hit value. And so that we never dip below kind of that net neutral line where they're all of a sudden going to feel like that original promise that was made to them has been broken. So fundamentally, that's a framework that's about surprise and delight. From a best practices standpoint, since that's what these sessions are all about, I'll roll through these since we're a little bit tight on time here. So I would say, start from scratch. If you're not using augmented reality from day one, don't do it. Wait till the next campaign cycle, as he mentioned. You want to bake that in and make that be a fundamental part of the thrust of the campaign, the training exercise. You don't just want it to be a layer on top or a bolt-on. Don't rush, know your audience. Just because it's complicated or clever doesn't mean it's better for the end user. You want to use novelty, so when something is fresh, you're going to get someone's attention, you're going to activate different parts of their brain, their memory and their retention is going to go up. And then when you have the opportunity to do so, give them choice, make their participation matter. I'll send all you guys this so you don't have to take pictures of it. Do the smell test. When you're done with the campaign, even before you let it go live, or when you're done creating that training exercise before it goes live, if you can't describe that to someone without them having the application in hand and they go, oh, that's something I'd want to do, and mean it, then it's failed the smell test, and you should go back and rethink that from the beginning. Front load the value exchange. We don't have to just kind of coast above net neutral. Really kind of hit people with value over and over prior to getting to that final 4D experience. That can be in the application, can be on the discovery mechanism. And if we do all of that, then for the most part, we're going to have really happy users, but you can't please everyone all the time. So that's all I got to say. Thank you.
Okay, great presentation. I'm sure there are questions. Questions in the audience? Okay, actually, I do have a question for you then.
Yeah.
You brought up a good point, and something I see, and it's good to see more people over the years of the AWE coming, but mainly it's been very engineer heavy. Right, and so there aren't a lot of designers, and I know that's a problem, is that not a lot of designers are familiar with the space, so they don't know the best kind of experience to build. So how do you guys reach out or look to get in touch with said teenage girl, because I don't know how many teenage girls you have on staff at DAQRI, but how do you get that insight, I guess is what I'm going after.
More than you'd think, but yeah, no. No, essentially, we do a lot of things where we're kind of planting seeds proactively. So developing, 4D Studio was a really big piece of it. So having an end-to-end workflow where you don't need a developer at all to be creating content, and then intentionally going into places where storytellers already exist and enabling them to do it in this new way. So we'll create kind of reference designs, things that do have augmented reality in them from the beginning, like our Elements 4D blocks, 4D fairy tale, things that kind of, spark the creativity of folks who are already telling stories, because we think even in this new era, they're going to be the best storytellers, and the people who are creating compelling content for teenage girls today are the ones who are going to create compelling augmented reality content for them in the future, not some brand new little agency that's popped up that happened to get to AR quicker than they did.
And then another point that you brought up, and I'd love, actually this is an audience participation question, more a question for the audience. How many people in this room have at least, and you can have made these apps, 5 AR apps on their mobile device right now? Raise your hand. Okay, how many have 10? How many have 3? How many have 1? And how many have none? Okay. All right. So, but I'm with you, and thank you guys for participating, because that is something funny. Is how often do you download an app, and then how long does it stay on there, right? And usually, even for a lot of people that I chat with at this event, it's kind of the one-hit wonder. You go in, you download it, you hit it, see how it is.
Yeah. And how many are buried in a folder?
Yeah. Exactly. Okay.
Quick question is, if anyone on the panel knows, so what kind of adoption numbers do you have for AR? Is it based on downloads from the App Store, and then do you actually get data on stickiness of the app?
Yeah, so it varies a tremendous amount by the distribution channel, because a lot of times you're kind of a second order pass through. So for example, on a print campaign, you've got the percentage of people who are going to look at the campaign, and then the people who are going to then follow through and do an activation. And one thing that I'll pull up just a quick visual for here. So for us, the business intelligence and the storytelling side of what's going on within an augmented reality experience is really, really crucial. So we'll always look very intensively at what the story is behind this. This is a different presentation, which I can also send you. But I'll show you how, in this case, it's really unique to the type of experience. But we see, on average, people come back to experiences about 10 times within augmented reality. Across every experience that we do, we see about a 60-second average engagement time. So if you compare that to like mobile ads or mobile video, it's just astronomically higher. And then there are also things that you can't even get from other media channels because you don't have the, the camera position, you don't have relative movement within an experience. So things like where people are looking on a 3D model, how they're progressing through a training exercise, what their action path looks like. Those are things that are really unique to augmented reality or 4D.
Can I do a quick follow-up?
Sure.
So, all right, so 2 questions. So one would be that depending on, to do that, to capture that data based on usage, it would depend on the development kit that you use, and you would have to...
Comes with all the DAQRI stuff, shameless plug. Yeah.
Okay, then the second question is, when you develop AR apps, do you leverage all the other devices on the phone and do other things to like, grab contacts and like see where people are with the geofence, even if they're not using the app?
We tend to do as little as we need to for that given campaign. And while you have access to those things, I think it goes back to that value exchange. If you're not making use of that to contextualize or personalize or deliver something relevant, don't ask for access to the sensor. I think Facebook got people in a really bad pattern where it's like, ask for all the permissions you could possibly ever need, and then you'll never have to come back. Ultimately, I think that just creates an extra barrier, an extra kind of red wall sort of environment.
I was just also going to say as well, just in relation to apps, one of the things we talk about in relation to apps, because it always comes up, oh, you need to download an app. And brands love the downloads. The retention rate of apps is really bad, though, really bad. If you have someone activate an app twice within a 7-day period, as far as the metric goes in relation to that, if 20% of people do that, then you're actually doing well. That's in the content-heavy app market. And what we say is apps, content-heavy apps as they exist today are like books. You read them from cover to cover, you've read the content, and then you put them back on the bookshelf, which is screen 1. And then next month you wanted a screen 2, screen 3, screen 4. And 96% of apps in the Australian market are deleted within 12 months. But augmented reality, if you embed a visual browser within an app, then suddenly you give it a utility, a reason for people to come back and re-engage, and they see these hopefully strong calls to action on out-of-home media or print or whatever, and they go, oh wow, the last experience I had was awesome. It's got to be awesome. So I'm going to keep this on there because I keep seeing this thing around. I keep seeing these call to action. So we can actually help with app retention and therefore increase the ROI of brands spending an average 130 to 150K on content-heavy apps. So AR can, really supercharge the app market.
Yeah.
Thank you.
It seems like a lot of you guys are focusing on, I guess, new ventures in that sense. Like you're in a marketing business and you want to add augmented reality. Can you have any insight on, you already have a 3D system that you want to add to it, so you can't really start from scratch?
What kind of 3D system?
Any type of 3D system. Let's say you're working on, let's say, but an in-house 3D system that you build, right?
Yep. Yeah, so we try not to recreate the wheel in almost every case. So we want to write plugins or converting tools for existing content stores because recreating all of that stuff is ridiculous. And then ultimately, we only want to be involved in content creation as long as we have to for people to understand what's unique about augmented reality. Because if you just throw them an SDK and say, go off and run on your own, they treat it like the web or they treat it like mobile or they treat it like whatever they're most familiar with. Whereas augmented reality has perspective and consumer choice and adaptiveness and camera position and things that they might not understand. So the first time we do something with them, we're going to kind of scale up pro services to help in that case. But then we want to get out of the way and just let them use the existing content stores. So one of the things my team spends a ton of time on is looking for what are new file types we can support, what are existing 3D tools that we can plug into or write connectors for, so that the folks who are creating content or telling stories today are the same ones who will be doing so in augmented reality.
Awesome. And then last question.
Hopefully, maybe last 2 questions. You're focused primarily on magazines.
We're not, well, all print materials because that's our core business, but if we end up becoming an augmented reality company in 5 years and we get rid of our printing presses, because that's the way everything goes, then we're open to change. We just want to be, we're just lucky because we have direct relationships with clients, massive, which is a massive asset to us, and we want to utilise that asset as best as possible and keep at the front of the wave.
Of course, sure. My other question is about call-outs and potentially the full AR experience. From a business marketing perspective, is there anybody in AR that's doing concept testing, hedonic testing on call-outs or other aspects of AR?
Yes.
Thank you.
And then there's a lot of thinking going into those call-outs as well. I mean, and trying to understand what works and what doesn't work, iconography, but at the end of the day, back to the whole plain language thing. Sometimes the company that's actually engaging, paying for the AR, they have to, as Matt was saying, they can't just put it in the top corner. They've got to go nuts. They've got to tell people, because if the content is good on the inside, the payoff will be good and people will come back. But certainly that first, second, third experience, you've got to make it really obvious. You can try to make it as pretty and as as simple and as, you know, pulled back as possible, but ultimately sometimes it's best just to say, just download this app and point your camera at this page, something awesome is going to happen, and have that like a quarter of the page.
And from a pure business like labor standpoint too, I think only recently have you seen AR companies getting big enough to justify having, say, dedicated user experience staff and people who are going to unpack, say, the psychological background of the audience that's being targeted. Because if you're creating an augmented reality company from scratch and you're going to go hire 5 people, one of them is not going to be a user experience person. You're probably going to hire 5 developers. I would. Yeah.
If I may comment on
This one?
Yes, I would say that for call-outs, or let's say call to actions, you should always remember that you will always have first-time users. So even if you're running a magazine or let's say a campaign that is for the 4th time with the same symbol, I don't know, 10,000 people already scanned that, on the 4th time you also will have somebody who's new. So that symbol will mean nothing. So you have to keep on saying whether you have to download an app, what will happen after that, whether it's awesome or it's, I don't know, you will get a subscription or an extension or whatever. So you have to think that both profiles will be there scanning, or that call to action is for both, not only the ones who already learned how to go through it.
Okay, well, definitely best practices for AR. Thanks for keeping it real, guys. A round of applause, please, for the speakers.